Knowledge is an ocean. Most dare only to stand at its shore, collecting the pretty shells of truth they call reality. But those who dare to dive deep, they do not find enlightenment. They find pressure. They find the dark. And they realize the ocean is not alive. It is merely waiting, still and eternal. For Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi, that ocean had a name. He called it the Force. And his highest purpose, the purpose of all Jedi, was to become a nameless drop within it. Inside his meditation chamber aboard a Republic vessel, he sat, legs crossed, back perfectly straight. His eyes were closed, his lids perfectly still. His breath was so slow that a passing fly would not feel its current. This was the state the Jedi craved: oneness. But oneness with what? Not with life. Not with all things. That was a misconception of the weak. He was merging with the great static. A perfect, cold, mathematical order where all emotion, all conflict, all individual will was nullified, dissolved like a grain of salt in the sea. It was the ultimate peace, the peace of the void. Where there is no suffering, because there is no feeling. Where there is no chaos, because there is no change. Emptiness. Perfection, the truth echoed in his mind. No passion, no fear. Only order. This is the purpose. This is the Force. His meditation was so deep, he could feel the silence between the notes of the cosmos. He could hear the pause in the turning of distant galaxies. But today, there was a ripple. A tiny, distant, yet sharp annoyance. A flaw in the perfection. His master, Qui-Gon Jinn, had entered. His presence was never entirely still. It always carried a little warmth, a little noise. The door slid open. Qui-Gon asked gently if he was disturbing his Padawan's stillness. Obi-Wan opened his eyes, a flicker of annoyance passing before he could suppress it. He replied that his master was always a disturbance with a purpose, and asked if the council had decided on the Naboo matter. Their conversation followed a familiar path, a philosophical debate they had replayed 100 times. Qui-Gon, with his dangerous curiosity, once again sowed doubt about the nature of peace, wondering if they were protecting it or merely imposing silence. He spoke of Naboo, of a culture that lived for art and emotion, suggesting that perhaps this was what the Trade Federation truly feared, the chaos of beauty. Obi-Wan, as always, was a bulwark of dogma. He patiently replied that beauty was temporary, but order was eternal. Silence is peace, master, he repeated, an unshakable truth. Hearing this, Qui-Gon only looked out the window at the stars and sighed. Yes, the first lesson, he murmured. Sometimes I wonder what other lessons we have missed. He turned, his eyes resolved. Come, Padawan, we have a silence to impose. Fate, or perhaps a cruel design of chaos, brought their damaged ship to Tatooine. An accident, Qui-Gon said. But Obi-Wan knew there were no accidents. This was a test. The planet itself was an insult to order, a place outside the Republic's control, beyond the Force's purification. The will of millions of creatures clashed against each other, creating a psychic static that gave Obi-Wan a headache. He felt desire, desperation, greed, survival. All of it was a screeching noise in his mind. They entered a junk shop owned by a flying Toydarian named Watto. The air inside was worse, thick with the smell of grease and the owner's avaricious will. And it was here, as Qui-Gon haggled for a T-14 hyperdrive, that Obi-Wan first felt it. It was not a ripple. It was a seismic event, a hurricane, a scream of raw, uncontrolled, unrefined life, erupting within the great static he worshipped. It was painful. A sharp, stabbing agony behind his eyes. He felt a trickle of warm blood run from his nose. What is this? He thought in panic. A concentration of will, of chaos, impossible. It's too strong. The static in his mind was replaced by a beat, like a cosmic war drum, growing faster and louder. He staggered, pressing his temples. The static within him, the defensive wall he had built his entire life, was cracking. Like a sudden fever in a healthy body, his body was trying to fight off a foreign agent. He looked around frantically, his vision blurring, and then his eyes fell upon the source of the earthquake. It was a slave boy, about 9 years old, with sandy, blonde hair. and tattered clothes. The boy looked up from a droid he was fixing and smiled at them. A pure, guileless smile. But behind that smile, Obi-Wan did not see a child. He saw a sun. A nuclear reactor of will and life, burning away the stillness around it. At his side, Qui-Gon whispered in utter, ecstatic disbelief. He spoke of midi-chlorian counts that must be off the charts. But Obi-Wan didn't feel microorganisms. He didn't see a miracle. In his mind, one word rang out with clean, clear disgust: contagion. He saw a tumor, a cosmic anomaly. Qui-Gon Jinn, the heretic explorer, saw proof of his living force. But Obi-Wan Kenobi, the faithful monk of the static, saw only a bug in the system, a seed of ultimate chaos that could undo the perfect order the Jedi had spent millennia curating. They called him the Chosen One, but as Obi-Wan looked into the clear, blue eyes of Anakin Skywalker, he knew the prophecy had been misunderstood. This was not a savior. This was a plague. This was the fever that would burn the galaxy down. Fear takes many forms. Sometimes it is the shadow in an alley, sometimes the barrel of an enemy's blaster. But for Obi-Wan Kenobi, now, fear had the face of a 9-year-old boy sleeping in the next cabin. Anakin Skywalker, as soon as they had left Watto's shop, in the privacy of the Queen's starship, Obi-Wan confronted his master. Their debate was no longer philosophical. It was a direct confrontation. He argued that the boy was a danger, a pathogen of the Force, an anomaly that needed to be reported and quarantined, not nurtured. He described the pain, the feeling of his mind being torn apart by Anakin's chaotic life force. But Qui-Gon Jinn would not listen. His eyes, which usually held a gentle curiosity, now burned with the fire of a zealot. He saw in Anakin not a disease but a miracle. "You fear change, Obi-Wan," he said, his voice laced with a deep sadness. "You see the Force as a perfect crystal of ice, orderly, beautiful, and unchanging. Any crack, any melting is a flaw, but I see the Force as a rainforest. It is chaotic, it is brutal, there is life and death in every leaf, but it is vibrant and ever-growing. That boy is not a crack in your crystal. That boy is an entire forest." Hope, the word rang in Obi-Wan's ears like a curse. He knew he had lost his master to a dangerous idea. And he knew his own mission now had to be carried out alone, in silence. The Buna Eve Padres was, for Obi-Wan, a horrifying field study. He did not see a talented pilot. He saw a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. When Anakin sat in the cockpit, the Force around him did not merely flow, it bent to his will. The other racers drove with reflexes. Anakin drove by imposing his will on reality. A loose bolt on a rival's engine would tighten itself. A headwind would suddenly shift. It was not luck, it was manipulation. He does not avoid chaos, Obi-Wan realized, a wave of nausea rising in him. He is chaos. When Anakin's Podreser crossed the finish line, Qui-Gon saw a champion. Obi-Wan saw only a virus that had perfectly demonstrated its ability to overwhelm its environment. They had their hyperdrive. They could leave. But they were taking the pathogen with them. As they prepared to depart at sunset, a dark figure appeared in the desert. A Zebrak warrior with complex red and black tattoos, his eyes burning with absolute focus. He ignited a double-bladed red lightsaber that hummed with a snarling growl, unlike the clean thrum of a Jedi's blade. The duel began, and Obi-Wan immediately realized he was facing something new. The attacker's style was a dance of pure emotion. It was rage, it was the joy of battle, it was a terrifyingly potent life force. He was another manifestation of the same power Anakin held, but honed into a deadly weapon. He is a fever, too, Obi-Wan thought, dodging a furious strike. But a trained one. They barely managed to fight him off and escape. Aboard the ship, Qui-Gon mused that it was a Sith warrior, but his voice was uncertain. He spoke of the passion in his fighting style, a brutal focus the Jedi deemed a weakness. But in him was a source of incredible power. Obi-Wan said nothing. He just looked at the sleeping form of Anakin, and for the first time, he clearly pictured the future: this blond boy, with burning eyes and a red lightsaber. Coruscant, the apex of order, received Anakin like a foreign object. The Jedi Council did not greet him as a child, but as a specimen in a sterile lab. They did not test his potential. They scanned him for infection. When the ancient master Yoda spoke his famous words, "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." It was not a warning. It was a diagnosis. Yoda was listing the symptoms. The boy radiated like heat. Mace Windu bluntly declared the boy an uncontrollable anomaly. And they refused to train him, not because of his age or his fear, but because his very nature was the antithesis of the Jedi Order. Furious, Qui-Gon Jinn left the chamber. He declared to Obi-Wan that he would train Anakin himself. But then, in a shadowed alcove of the temple, he pulled Obi-Wan aside, his voice low and heavy with a terrible secret he had unearthed from forbidden texts. "Obi-Wan," he began, "what we know of the Sith is a lie." In the quiet of the corridor, Qui-Gon explained, the Sith were not a cult of evil. They were the original Jedi Order, an order that worshipped the living force in all its chaotic, passionate glory. Love, anger, ambition, fear, all were part of the force. "Then what are we?" Obi-Wan whispered, his throat dry. "We're Qui-Gon said, and each word was a hammer blow to Obi-Wan's world. "We're the heretics. We are the descendants of a sect that staged a great purge thousands of years ago. A group that worshipped the static, the void, the perfection of death. They overthrew the old order, branded their brothers Sith, an ancient word for unclean, and began their campaign to impose stagnation upon the galaxy. We are the jailers, Obi-Wan, not the guardians." Obi-Wan's entire universe collapsed in that moment. The sworn enemy was the original truth. The order he served was built on a lie. And his master, the teacher he revered, was about to follow the path of the original heretics, with Anakin as their new messiah. He stood there, in the cold hallway of the temple, utterly alone. He had to make a choice: loyalty to a false order, or confronting the terrifying, chaotic truth that Anakin Skywalker represented. There are moments in a being's life where time seems to stop, and the entire universe shrinks to a single choice. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, that moment was now, in the cold corridor of the Jedi Temple, under the lifeless gaze of marble statues. His master Qui-Gon Jinn had just handed him a truth that could burn the galaxy. Qui-Gon waited. He expected protest, argument, or perhaps a silent acceptance. But Obi-Wan did nothing. He just stood there, his mind a blizzard of shattering beliefs. After an eternity, Obi-Wan bowed his head, the familiar gesture of a Padawan. His voice was level, devoid of emotion. "I am your Padawan master. I will follow you." Qui-Gon let out a breath of relief, a rare, warm smile gracing his lips. He believed his student was beginning to see the true light. He was wrong, because in Obi-Wan's mind, a different, colder vow had just been forged. He would not follow Qui-Gon into what he saw as the madness of chaos. Nor could he return to serve an order he now knew was a fraud. He had chosen a third path, a lonely one. He would remain at Qui-Gon's side, playing the part of the dutiful apprentice. But his true mission had changed. He would become a warden. He would study Anakin, learn the limits of this fever. And if necessary, he would be the final bulwark, the surgeon who would remove the tumor before it could metastasize. He was no longer loyal to the Jedi Council or to Qui-Gon. He was loyal only to a single concept: the survival of some form of order against the annihilation of absolute chaos. Obi-Wan Kenobi died in that hallway. A cold pragmatist was born. The return journey to Naboo was a strange one. The air on the ship was thick with unspoken calculations. Obi-Wan watched as Qui-Gon began to train Anakin, but these were not lessons he had ever known. There were no meditations to quiet the mind. Instead, Qui-Gon encouraged the boy to feel everything more intensely. When Anakin grew fearful during a meteor shower, Qui-Gon knelt beside him. "Good," he said. "Fear tells you you're alive. Don't quiet it, Anakin. Listen to it. What is it telling you? Use it as a compass." To Obi-Wan, every one of his master's words was like pouring gasoline on a fire. He saw Anakin, under this guidance, becoming more volatile. Sometimes small objects would tremble around the boy when he was angry. Sometimes he swore he saw Padme smile at the exact moment Anakin was thinking of her. The boy was not just a pathogen, he was being actively cultivated. When they arrived on Naboo, they found a planet under occupation. But through his new, cynical lens, Obi-Wan no longer saw a simple trade dispute. He saw a philosophical conflict on a planetary scale. The Trade Federation's droid army moved with perfect, emotionless synchronicity. They were the physical manifestation of the very order the Jedi worshipped, a sterile logic imposed upon a chaotic world of art and feeling. Queen Amidala's bold plan to seek help from the Gungans was to Obi-Wan an act of madness, piling chaos on top of chaos. But Qui-Gon fully endorsed it. Nature finds balance in diversity, Obi-Wan, he said, not in uniformity. And then, as was inevitable, tragedy struck. In the climactic battle for Theed, the Dark Warrior from Tatooine, Darth Maul, reappeared. Their confrontation was not a brief skirmish, it was a dance of destiny. Maul fought with a religious ecstasy, believing himself a holy warrior sent to shatter the chains of the Great Static. He saw the Jedi as gray ghosts. Qui-Gon faced him not as an enemy, but as a puzzle. He fought not just to survive, but to learn to understand the true Sith path in action. But he was a scholar who had just found a forbidden book, while Maul had been born of its text. Maul's pure passion was too overwhelming. In a moment of analytical hesitation from Qui-Gon, Maul's red blade struck home. Obi-Wan screamed, a sound not of a Jedi, but of a man. He was trapped behind a laser gate, forced to watch his master fall. When the gate deactivated, he rushed to Qui-Gon's side. Obi-Wan, the dying master, rasped blood at his lips. The boy, don't let them pacify him. The chaos is life. Promise me. Those were his final words. He did not say, train the boy. He said, do not let them extinguish him. He had passed on a philosophical burden, a cold rage, an emotion Obi-Wan had suppressed his entire life, ignited within him. He faced Maul. But he did not fight with passion. He fought like a machine. He cast aside all feeling, leaving only cold, hard logic. He used the very dogma of the Grey Jedi to analyze Maul's passion, and he found a flaw. Maul's confidence became overconfidence. In a moment of arrogant flourish, he left an opening. And Obi-Wan, with a move calculated to the millimeter, ended him. It was a victory of ice over fire. He had won, but he felt only emptiness. The victory celebration on Naboo was a riot of color and sound, but Obi-Wan felt none of it. He stood in the crowd, a ghost, his eyes fixed on one man, Senator Palpatine, newly elected Supreme Chancellor, smiling benevolently. And then, the final, most horrific twist clicked into place in Obi-Wan's mind. He had all the pieces. The invasion, the appearance of Maul, a true Sith, the discovery of Anakin, a Force anomaly, all at the same time, all leading to one man's ascension. No, Obi-Wan realized, a chill running down his spine. Palpatine is not a Sith trying to restore the old ways. He is something else. He stands outside this war. He had used the chaotic, true Sith to weaken the orderly Jedi. He had orchestrated everything for the ultimate chaotic weapon, Anakin, to fall into their hands. Palpatine did not follow the philosophy of life or the philosophy of stasis. He wanted to control both. He didn't just want to rule the galaxy. He wanted to rule the Force itself, to bend reality to his will. Obi-Wan looked at Anakin, who was laughing with Padme. He looked at Palpatine, waving to the cheering crowds. He was standing alone between two apocalypses. One was the slow, silent death of the Jedi static. The other was the fiery, chaotic reign of whatever Palpatine was planning. And the promise he made to Qui-Gon now felt like an impossible, cosmic joke. He had to protect the fire, knowing it would be used to burn the galaxy. 10 years. A decade. In the grand turning of the galaxy, it is but a blink. But in the life of a being, it is enough time for a boy to become a man and for a terrifying truth to take root and grow into a poison tree. 10 years had passed since the tragedy on Naboo. Obi-Wan Kenobi was now a respected Jedi Knight, a model member of the Order. Anakin Skywalker was his Padawan, a young man of extraordinary talent with a fire that never dimmed in his eyes. To the galaxy, they were the image of a Jedi master and apprentice, but it was a facade. In truth, they lived in an exquisitely crafted cage. Obi-Wan was not a master, he was a warden, a dutiful warden who spent every day building invisible walls around the exploding star entrusted to him. Every lesson on control, every lecture on suppressing emotion, was another brick in that prison. He did it with a placid face, but internally, he was walking a tightrope over a bottomless abyss. Anakin, for his part, felt those invisible bars. He loved Obi-Wan like a brother, but resented his coldness and distrust. In his mind, the memory of Qui-Gon Jinn had become that of a martyred saint, the only one who understood his true nature. He craved recognition, but all he received from his master was caution. And that void created a vacuum that another was all too willing to fill, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Their relationship, too, had grown over the decade. Palpatine had become a father figure, a confidant. He never told Anakin to control his power. On the contrary, he called it a gift. "Your passion, my boy," he would often say in their private meetings, "is what makes you special. Never let those who fear your strength convince you it is a weakness." Each word of praise was a sweet poison, slowly weaning Anakin from his master. And so, a cold war was waged in silence for 10 years. A chess game between three players, the warden in a Jedi robe, the prisoner with the power of a chaotic god, and the master manipulator smiling from the height of power. It all began with an explosion, a failed assassination attempt on Senator Padme Amidala's vessel. After a breathtaking chase through Coruscant's sky lanes, the assassin was silenced by a poisoned dart before she could reveal her employer. To the Jedi Council, it was a mystery to be solved. To Obi-Wan, it was a plan proceeding perfectly. That night, in the quiet of his chambers, Obi-Wan did not meditate for peace. He meditated to review the details of his gambit. The narrator takes us deep into his mind, to a place no Jedi would dare look. Jango Fett, a traceable bounty hunter. The dart from the planet Kamino, a world erased from the Jedi archives. Perfect, he thought. The path is laid. The terrible truth was revealed. The one who had hired the bounty hunter, who had orchestrated the entire attack, was Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. It was his desperate move. He saw Palpatine's influence over Anakin growing daily. He had to separate them. By creating a credible threat against the one person Anakin truly cared for, he forced the Council's hand. Anakin was assigned to protect Padme on Naboo, far from Coruscant. It also gave Obi-Wan the perfect excuse to conduct his own investigation, free from the Council's watchful eyes. "I have used a controlled chaos," he reasoned with himself, the guilt a cold weight in his gut, to prevent an uncontrollable one. "I have endangered Padme to save the galaxy from Anakin." Is this the will of the living force, or the cold logic of a gray Jedi? I no longer know. His plan worked. As Anakin and Padme journeyed to Naboo, the fire Obi-Wan feared most began to burn. Their feelings for each other blossomed, not like a flower, but like a forest fire. One afternoon, in a moment of unrestrained emotion from Anakin, the faded flowers around them suddenly bloomed again in vibrant color. It was beautiful, but also terrifying, a sign of his reality bending power growing beyond all control. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan followed the trail to the storm-racked planet of Kamino. He did not find a nest of assassins. He found something far more frightening. An army. Millions of clones grown from the DNA of Jango Fett, perfectly obedient and ready for battle. The Kaminoans claimed the army had been ordered for the Republic a decade ago by a Jedi master named Sifo. Dias, a clumsy lie Obi-Wan saw through immediately. He looked at the endless ranks of white armored soldiers, moving as one, with no individual will. He was not looking at soldiers. He was looking at Palpatine's other army. An army of perfect order. An army of the static. Standing in the endless rain of Kamino, looking at the identical faces of the clone army, all the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Obi-Wan's mind, forming a picture of absolute horror. Palpatine. It was always Palpatine. He hadn't just been grooming Anakin. He had been playing on two boards simultaneously. He had secretly created an army of absolute order, the clone troopers, perfect biological droids. At the same time, he was cultivating the ultimate weapon of absolute chaos, Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan shivered as he realized the grand, final plan. Palpatine would ignite a galactic war. He would pit his army of order against the separatist army of disorder. He would let the two extremes of the universe tear each other apart. And in the ashes, when both sides were exhausted, he would step forward, with his ultimate weapon Anakin Skywalker at his side, to establish a new empire. An empire where he ruled not just planets, but both sides of the Force itself. Obi-Wan stared out at the roaring ocean of Kamino. He was no longer a warden guarding a boy. He was a lone soldier, trapped between two approaching tsunamis, knowing both were created by the same hand. The promise he had made to Qui-Gon now felt like the punchline to a cruel, cosmic joke. When Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in the rain on Kamino, he saw one half of the equation of annihilation Palpatine had written. He sent a coded report to the Jedi Council, but omitted his most crucial suspicion, Palpatine's role. In this game, he could trust no one. His next move had to be his own. He followed Jango Fett to Geonosis, a red, barren world of rock spires, and walked right into a trap. In a dimly lit cell, he faced Count Dooku, the legendary Jedi Master who had left the Order. Dooku did not torture him, he talked. And his words were more terrifying than any blade. He confirmed Obi-Wan's worst fears. "The Chancellor is playing us all, Kenobi," Dooku warned, his voice a low hiss. "This war is a charade. He created my separatist movement, and he has been given your clone army. He intends to grind the galaxy to dust between them." Dooku confessed he had tried to create a third path, a true balance, but it was too late. "He doesn't just want power," Dooku concluded. "He wants the Force itself, and your boy Skywalker is his key." Anakin and Padme's arrival to rescue him was not heroism. It was the tragedy's inevitable escalation. They too were captured, and all three were brought to the Geonosis arena. This was where the explosion began. When the beasts were released, when Anexu clawed a gash across Padme's back, Anakin ceased to be a Jedi. His fear for her became a primal rage. The air around him crackled. The beasts themselves hesitated, sensing not just a Jedi, but a predator more ancient than themselves. His rage was a physical force, a distortion of reality. When the Jedi arrived, led by Mace Windu, it was not a rescue. It was a philosophical war. The Jedi fought with cold precision, a wall of order against the separatist droids. But at the center of the chaos was the volcano of Anakin, waiting to erupt. In the midst of the battle, Anakin heard only one thing: the nightmares of his mother Shami. He had to go. Without permission, he and Padme left the chaos of Geonosis and raced to Tatooine. There, he found her in a Tusken camp, dying after days of torture. The moment Shmi died in his arms was the moment the universe cracked in two. It was not grief. It was not anger. It was a cosmic event. The god of chaos, imprisoned within him for so long, finally broke its chains. A silent scream erupted from Anakin, not from his mouth, but from the Force itself. The Tusken hut did not explode. It imploded, crushed by an invisible force. The desert sand for a mile around was super, heated into a glittering field of black glass by a psychic shockwave. He did not merely slaughter the Tusken tribe. He unmade them, his rage a reality, warping power that erased them from existence. When he returned to Padme, he was no longer a grieving boy. He was a being who had tasted absolute, terrifying power. Padme looked into his eyes and saw not hate, but a power both terrifying and mesmerizing. She saw the living force that Qui-Gon had spoken of, in its most raw and dangerous form. And instead of recoiling, she stepped forward and embraced him. She had chosen her side. She chose the storm. When they returned to Geonosis, they confronted Dooku. The duel was swift. Dooku, a master of his own internal chaos, easily defeated both Obi-Wan's rigid logic and Anakin's wild fury. "Your logic is brittle, Kenobi," he chided. "And your chaos, boy, is unfocused. It will only consume you." Then Yoda arrived. Their duel was not light versus dark. It was absolute stasis versus controlled chaos. Yoda moved with a perfect, unnatural stillness, a being of pure static. Dooku moved with a fluid, powerful grace. They were an unsolvable equation. Realizing this, Dooku retreated, leaving the battlefield to a greater war. The Clone Wars had begun, and that was how Palpatine's play concluded. He had his war. The Army of Order, the clones, deployed across the galaxy under the Republic's banner. The Army of Disorder, the droids, rallied under Dooku. The two apocalypses had been unleashed. On Naboo, in a secret ceremony, Anakin and Padme were married. It was not just a vow of love. It was an alliance between the ultimate weapon of the living force and the political will of a queen. And on Coruscant, Palpatine watched his clone army depart, a knowing smile on his face. He had won. Only Obi-Wan remained, standing alone in the empty Jedi temple. He looked at his own reflection on the polished floor. He had failed. He could not stop the war. He could not contain Anakin. His promise to Qui-Gon now held a new, terrible meaning. He could not extinguish Anakin's fire. Therefore, he must learn to aim it. He must nurture this chaotic weapon, not to save the Republic, but so that one day he could point it at the heart of the very empire Palpatine was building. He was no longer a Jedi Knight. He was no longer a master. He had accepted his final role, the reluctant strategist for a cosmic horror, a lone soldier biding his time for the war after the war. The mask of the dutiful Jedi Master was now perfectly in place, and no one could see the cold, calculating survivor underneath.